Now we go. Welcome to BNEWS Weekly Special Report. I'm Phil Gallagher, along with our special guest today, retiring Town Administrator of Burlington, John Petrin.
Thank you for having me, Phil.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. John is completing his 7th year as the Town Administrator in Burlington, and it's been a pretty eventful 7 years. We're going to talk about that and his career, but more importantly, we're going to talk about the Patriots because we're taping today as the day after the Patriots' extraordinary win against the Los Angeles Rams, and we're both pleased to report that they were in good enough shape to carry on a hopefully a meaningful conversation. So let's start right away, John. Where were you while you enjoyed that game?
I was home last night,
Yeah.
you know, my wife, and so it's been great. I've had 3 Super Bowls and 2 World Series being here in Burlington, so pretty good run on that.
Yeah. And it's a shame that we had to wait a full 5 months before we got another world championship.
Yeah, I know. I know. Yeah, from October to now. So, it's twice it's happened now.
Oh my God.
Back in, 07 and now, with the, 04 actually, and now, 07 should have been another one.
Right. We were talking about growing up.
Yeah.
We're relatively in the same age group. And all we had is the Celtics. I mean, nobody else could get a win,
Yeah, I know. We went many. We had a couple Bobby Orr years.
Yeah, that was
back in
fantastic, too.
the early '70s. Two with Bobby Orr, but there was the Celtics. The old Havlicek days. For me, and and then we were talking about the Rod Russ Patriots. And
the Sullivan Stadium.
Yeah, Sullivan, and boy, that was. And then a lot of near misses for the Red Sox, but could just never get over that hump until '04.
Yeah. So let's start with, let's go back in time and talk about your career. How is it that you became involved in municipal government? What was it that attracted to you? What were the influences that got you there?
So back in high school, I started getting involved. I had, a good friend. His father had run for selectman years earlier. I was out, back in the day when you went house to house delivering things, so I had gotten involved a little bit that way. But in high school, I just got the bug, seeing what's happening. I was involved in youth sports. I was involved in, I grew up in Bellingham, and just got involved in that way. And I said, government is where I want it to be. And like I say, started in high school, got the bug, and went to college. Got a bachelor's in political science from Stonehill, and just kept going from there. Then went and got my master's. And
where did you first enter into municipal government?
Bellingham, where I grew up. I started and I ran for office. Didn't win the first 2 times, but won the 3rd time out. I ran when I was 19, and then won when I was 21, and got into office. Assessor.
Assessor.
Yeah, so I got on the board of assessors, and then I was also elected to the Parks Commission, at the time. So that's so I got started, back then, and then I started working full-time when I was in college for the police department in Bellingham as a dispatcher. So I got my years in early.
So you had some public safety, which proved to be valuable later on, certainly.
Yeah, exactly, and enough to be dangerous. I know enough of the backside, as I keep telling Chief Kent, I remember when, so.
Nothing like a little information running amok, right?
Exactly, don't call me an expert, but I know enough to get dangerous with it.
So when did you run into the management side of things?
1985, I began my career as a manager in the town of Pepperell. I decided to, that was going to be my career, and I was young and 26 at the time, and became a manager in Pepperell, and been doing it ever since.
Beautiful rural.
Yeah, it is very, very quaint little town. It's got a little bit of New Hampshire look to it.
Is Camp Massapog still up there? Or is
not
that
familiar with that one.
That was the next town, the little next town.
Oh, Townsend maybe?
No, the other side.
Oh, the other side, Dunstable.
Dunstable, yeah, I think that's where it is. Okay, so you get up to Pepperell. Where's the next stop?
So then Pepperell, I went to the town of Harvard. So I was there for 13 years. I did the whole Devons piece.
Right.
So, early on they closed Devons, or announced its closure. And then we had to work on the redevelopment. So that whole Devons project, I had a hand, in working with that Devons side. I acted as the municipal coordinator, on the planning side of that. And it was a very interesting project.
So Harvard, Pepperell, Harvard, Devon, so you had the dynamic of working with what turned out to be a dynamic development effort,
Exactly.
similar to what might happen in Burlington or happened in Burlington previously.
Yeah, so I had a little bit of experience, with that development side and planning, and looking at the big picture, from the business perspective, what can attract.
Okay, so you get here and right away you jump in, you see what the challenges are. Talk about the Grandview Farm. That was a kind of a white elephant for a period of time.
Yeah, it was. I think my first town meeting, I had to go in and explain that there wasn't enough money in the project, and I have to ask. I forget how much it was, maybe $600,000-800,000. I had to go to town meeting in addition, and everybody's saying, well, this is what it is. Don't blame me. I'm the new guy, but here's what it is if you want to get the project done. So we got the money and got the project, and Grandview's been a great operation for the town.
Kind of filled out the campus setting for Burlington at that point.
Yeah, I think there's a little more can be filled out, but for the most part, it helped create that strip and some purpose for the whole strip.
Right. You also acquired the former Burlington Bank and Trust, Bank of America, Bay Bank, whatever it was there, in between
33 Center and
the Murphy Building and
and that's Youth and Family Services now, so that we could free up some space at the Human Services Building to expand space for Council on Aging, for programming. So a lot of project work there. Yeah.
Now we've got the Terrace Hall Fire Station. That was another major project.
Yeah, so that's nearly complete. I took a tour last week, and so that's getting to be finished, and we're hoping to open that by June of this year.
Now the question always is, for those who don't want to spend any money, myself included, that why do we need a gigantic building down there? There's virtually no fires left in the town of Burlington, or even statewide, very rarely, except in the more dense, older communities with wood structures.
So it's more emergency response now than it is a fire department. Especially on the medical side of what we do. So we're responding, what has, back when we started, way back when, you had an ambulance, you picked them up and you brought them to the hospital,
and you hope they live during the trip.
And you hope to, scoop them and transport them, and that's, that's an overstatement. But, now today, there's so much that can be done at the scene, to help, save lives, sooner and get to people right away. So again, it's an emergency response aspect. So we're fortunate with all the building codes and the technology of today, the materials, that fires don't occur as often as they do. We still have fires here and there. You still read about the deadly fires here and there. But, and the other one is smoking. So many people don't smoke now compared, how many fires were started with smoking in bed back in the day?
Most common.
And fireplaces, now with all the technology. But again, the emergency response aspect. We do so many calls, we're busy, all I hear is that fire engine all day long going out from the center station. Office, we just hear, the alarms, and heading out all the time. So our calls, we presented all that information, 3 years ago, to the town with the full reports as to the types of calls, and that EMS level is up so much now. We're, so many times of the day we have both ambulances out at the same time. It's unbelievable.
Now we had a contract with a private organization for the extended services at the scene.
Sure. What's called ALS.
ALS. To your credit and the Chief Yetman's credit, we're now upgrading internally with skill sets. What's going on
So we're
there?
trying to do that. So that's we're in negotiation still, with the fire union to see if we can come to some agreement on that. We're looking at that whole issue of right now our fire department is what's called BLS, Basic Life Support. So they can go out, they're EMTs. And we have a contract with Armstrong, who show up and they provide the paramedic level of service, which basically they can administer drugs and do certain things that an EMT cannot. So we're looking at improving, in-house, so that we're not having the chase car, get to the scene.
Yeah. Well, that's quite a change from
huge.
60 years ago, which I
Yeah.
think our first ambulance in it was a converted hearse.
Yeah,
I'm
Yeah.
not sure, but I think I recall that. I think
That
it
was common,
brown.
back in the day. You look at those ambulances, the way it worked, and and yeah, it was, basically, as I said, scoop them and deliver them. Now, the services we can provide at the scene are amazing.
Now, the opioid crisis affects us like it does everywhere else in the nation. I think you implemented the Narcan program in the town. Tell us what that is.
So all our emergency responders, police and fire, are trained, with the Narcan. That's what, 3 or 4 years. It's been around now. That drug that can, rescue people if you're on an overdose and you're potentially, dying from it, heart stopped and everything. The Narcan is, basically brings you right back from it. So, I think we were the first department through Chief Kent and the police side, that trained all our officers, and our officers were very willing. Some places they want to bargain over it, but I think our officers saw that this was, what was right. For the community. We got, great departments here. I can't say enough about, all of our departments, but public safety is what
Chief
we're
Kent,
talking about.
Chief
Chief Kent,
Yetman, sure.
Yetman, and, the members of those departments are outstanding.
So now another thing, we had a 75-year-old DPW barn situated right on top of our aquifer between the mall and the Great Meadow. Another opportunity to upgrade, well, particularly the equipment, because all our equipment had been outside. Tell us what went into that decision.
So the town's been looking at this for a very long time, and the problem, of course, is land. So the town actually doesn't own a lot of land, and most of the land, in town is being used. There's not these vacant lots you can take a look at, that are reasonable in price, as well. So we were looking at various locations. I think, there were other locations that might have been a little bit better from a operational perspective, where to be, but they just weren't affordable. So what we decided, and town meeting has agreed to, was a two-phase approach of 2 parcels of land. The current site, to redo the current site, bring it up to, specs of today, put in enough environmental, mitigation, with it, so that, we're protecting the land around it, and then utilize the clock and read site as additional space to make it all work, so that recreation, maintenance, and all our public works facilities have upgraded areas. If people saw the film we did several TV shows and showed, the conditions our people work in, they're pretty pathetic is the only way I can put it. So we appreciated the fact that all the boards and town meeting pretty much fully agreed. I was really surprised by the vote at town meeting that night. I wasn't sure we would have the 2/3 vote, but we had much more than 2/3. I think, people understood the scope and what we needed to do.
Well, I had a summer job there in 1967, and it's decrepit then.
Yeah. It was built, for basically a part-time department almost, back in the day. There was only a few full-timers, and it's just never really been expanded upon. But it's the facilities inside. When you look at the bathrooms and, facilities that our people have to work in. And then you mentioned all the equipment we leave outside. It's just not good for the equipment, to have it all sitting outside all the time.
Now that has some tangential effects. What happens to Overlook Park? What happens to the water department, which strangely enough was put right next to the Great Meadow, our primary water supply 60 years ago?
Yeah, which is not today, so that well station is closed. And so we'll make some decisions down the road on both those. Overlook is still a park. It's we're not selling that property. What it can look like, we're still going to use that for some storage. There's still a few buildings there that are good, and recreation has so much stuff. From the various seasons, programming more than the maintenance side, but their programming side. So they'll still use some of that. So we'll still make use of that. And we're not getting rid of the old water department building. What we do with it in the future remains to be decide, but we have some ideas.
So let's talk about water for a minute. You know, we don't need to go back too far in history in terms of you know, the pollution that occurred that impacted the Great Meadow, but you've proposed some various strategies in terms of joining the MWRA, which we were already in sewer, and I want to talk about the sewer line, by the way, as another great project that was completed. But why are we joining the MWRA for water?
The main reason is redundancy. We don't have the water capacity within this town, and the water we do have is difficult to continue to mine, you know, to keep the flow going.
This is because of increasing requirements in terms of
partially
purity?
Increasing requirements, but also the fact, you know, we have two plants. You know, Vine Brook is, you know, aquifer, you know, water that comes up. That water's been, you know, it's clean and meets all the requirements. But there's a lot of cleaning that, you know, is being undertaken to get there. We do have some wells closed, you know.
But that's iron and manganese.
1,4-dioxane, you know, which is a byproduct mostly of that manufacturing you talked about in the 50s, which wasn't controlled like, you know, things are, you know, controlled today, which polluted, you know, some of that water. So we're working with that. You know, and then our Mill Pond, you know, is water that comes from outside. It's surface water that comes out from outside the town. And what happens, you know, we were in trouble, you know, 3 years ago when the big drought, you know, was occurring.
The
Shawsheen dropped.
Sure.
And so we can't guarantee the water supply will always be there. And so we need another source, you know, and it's not, again, not as much. We've been maintaining the same amount of water, but keeping our capacity to produce that water is getting more and more difficult. So we worked all this through. We had several committees. Town meeting appointed, you know, a committee 2 years ago. We worked, you know, hand in hand with them. And in the end, I think we only had 3 people at town meeting vote against, you know, joining MWRA. I think everybody saw it's our only, you know, possible realistic hope, long term. There are other things we could have done in town, but it would have been more costly. And then it doesn't address the redundancy issue. So could we have put in some cleaning aspects to, you know, to do the job with the water we have? Yes. But then we might not have that water available to us.
Supply.
So again, supply, and I'll use the word again, redundancy. You know, having the capacity, you know, into the future. And if one capacity is troubled, you have another one to go to. So that's the real reason.
So we have 2 different purification processes.
Yes.
One at the Great Meadow, the other at
Mill Pond.
The Mill Pond. What are they? I guess we do airification.
Yeah. So now I'm done. You know. So you know, it's like, you know, you've got enough out of me here. Now you're going to bring in the other John Sanchez, to get into your questions.
Okay. All right. Then let's go to this. When are we going? When is the connection? We have a connection with Lexington. When is the full connection going to be completed?
Sure.
And how frequently we'll be using it to be an adjunct to our current production?
So right now we have a minor connection. So we have the capacity to connect for several 100,000 gallons a day, which is an emergency, you know, capacity, which doesn't come close to, you know, what we need. We are building a line, a secondary emergency line along Adams Street that will be built hopefully this year. That gives us a little bit more capacity. But the full capacity that we're talking about is going to come with a line that goes to the main line of MWRA in Arlington. So that means building, I'm going to say 3 miles of pipe, I forget the exact, but building a pipeline, you know, a water line from Vine Brook.
Now, do we have the right of way, or is this going to go through the street? So
goes through the street. So now,
it's not going to be as the crow flies.
No, it'll be through. It's all being determined at this point. So what we are doing is all the environmental notification review, you know, process. This is a state process. We're in the middle of all that. We filed all that paperwork. We appreciate Lexington's been working very well with us. We've been, hand in hand in reviewing with them and Bedford, because Bedford gets their water through Lexington as well from MWRA to support their services. So everybody's been talking. We're working with MWRA, legislature, the state environmental folks, and all that's being reviewed at this point. So that report will be released, and all the environmental aspects will be reviewed. And so no final decisions have been made. That's why we're doing all the reviews at this time.
Okay, we've been in the MWRA sewer system, and if we go back 65 years, we find, and to your great credit, this is something that doesn't make news, but in those days, nobody really cared whether you put your sewer line directly through your water supply, which is what they did, as well as down at Hon Pond. So we had from the Terrace Hall pumping station, we had a direct line up Mall Road, Bedford Street, et cetera, down 3A to Woburns Hon Pond. How were you able to finally get that passed so we could finally divert that sewer line?
Yeah, so that was interesting. The first phase of that project was through Bob Mercia when he was here, and I was here for the ribbon cutting. He did the heavy work on that one. Then the Horn Pond, I was here, because now trying to explain to our town meeting we're going to spend $1 million or whatever it was in Woburn was an interesting discussion. But I think everybody gets the concept. It's not like it was 30 years ago where discussing environmental issues was much more difficult, I think, back in the day. Today, people are more conscious about the whole environmental, aspect. And we were able to, sell that at town meeting. And so we did do that, 3, 4, 5 years ago.
For those residents out there who don't recall, when the sewer line filled up with very rainy season or snow melt, we would have to open up the gates at Terrace Hall and put raw sewage into the street.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they were also backflowing right into Hon Pond.
Which happens. I mean, you hear about that every once in a while with the big storms in Boston Harbor still.
Right.
And it's a practice that shouldn't occur. But I think we've come a long way, on that sewer side.
We're getting 5 or 6 incidences a year.
A lot of credit to John Setchers, Tom Hayes, and and the folks in DPW on planning a lot of this out. The I&I programs, we've been
that was
implementing all these years, and we've gone, so this is a long time in coming.
Now here's the big question: we're joining MWRA, which is the most indebted agency in Massachusetts. What portion of that debt are we taking upon ourselves as a result of joining a further connection?
So we don't. What we pay is a fee to join, and then we pay, the water rates. So we're not taking on, we're a member community, but again, their finances are separated. It's not on the town. And so, all of that is part of the review, that goes on. And yes, they're very much in, have, large debt, but so do we, when you look at our books. With what's on the books, every place does. And the whole thing is, what's your capacity to pay that debt?
Yeah. Well, let's stop there just for a second, because I want to segue into that. We don't actually have a lot of debt, comparatively speaking, to the information you and Paul had provided to the Ways and Means
Well, we have
Committee.
a lot of debt, but not as much as many other communities.
Right.
So, everything is, comparable. You talk about these things, and it's relative to, what you have. So our debt schedule is lower here. And that's something I've been talking about for 7 years. And, Brad Bond, from Ways and Means has this discussion. And we're on that page that, we needed to put more into facilities,
And infrastructure.
And infrastructure. And that's what I think we've been looking at the last few years. So that's why we're doing, the fire station. We did, the senior center, fire station. Water, Grandview Farms, DPW, so we've been putting a lot of that and making sure we've been replacing our debt as well as, slightly increasing our infrastructure capacity because, that's one of the things, I've been saying is we haven't put enough into facilities, and so that's one of the things when I came, I had to look at creating a facilities division, in Public Works, things were in tough shape, from a maintenance viewpoint. They now do a great job, so we've gone through all our buildings and facilities. They are, working, Richie Reed now is the division head, for facilities and cemeteries, got a great crew there. So since I've been here, we've hired an electrician, We've hired an HVAC guy, you know, and we have a plumber, you know, so we have these people on board, you know, who have the capacity, you know, to
A
do
social
the job
officer at the
inside.
police department by grant, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it.
So, and a deputy police chief, you know, that wasn't there, you know, so we've looked at our operations across the board. We wanted to make sure that we have strengthened our management capacity for the future, you know, as well as our capacity to provide services.
Right. Now, financial reporting seems to have really gone leap years ahead. And one of the things that stuck out was we were very low in terms of the amount of debt that we had. But more importantly, we only had 4%. I don't say that only, but 4% of cash flow dedicated to debt service.
Yeah.
And interestingly, at the Ways and Means Committee, you said that the rating agencies were a little disappointed in that. They were looking to see higher debt service. Explain that to me.
So what they want to do is make sure that we're thinking of our future. You know, again, it gets into discussion I was having on infrastructure. You know, do we have the capacity to maintain? Infrastructure is so critical to an organization of this nature. And that's the last thing that gets it. When you're in lean years, the thing you cut first is infrastructure.
Capital spending,
capital expenditures. And so you look at that, and we haven't here. So we've been, you know, our roads are in great shape. You know, we put a lot of money into the sewer, you know, when you're talking about that sewer line, the water with MWRA, and the last thing we've been really looking at is the buildings. So we built the 2 new schools, you know, 10 years ago.
48%
you know,
state funding.
yeah, 48% state funding, but prior to that, there had really not been a lot of capital improvements, you know, for a long time here. And so one of the things I've been trying to stress is plan that, you know, and have that built in. And, you know, you talked about the financial reporting, you know, Paul Sagarino, you know, who's, you know, replacing me as town administrator, as town accountant, has, you know, you said light years. That, you know, Paul has really done a heck of a job, you know, in his 12 years or so at the town in, you know, bringing our financial reporting and the understanding of those reports to a whole new level from where they were at that point. So you're on Ways and Means now for, what, the last year or so, and you see the level of discussions compared to, you know, 10 to 20 years ago. You know, the level of discussions we have now at Ways and Means and the paperwork we're putting, you know, before you. You know, that comparison report we do, you know, with our 13 neighbors.
Sure.
You know, you see, you know, how do we compare and where do we rate, you know, as far as doing a job at that level? You know, we're doing the financial reporting, you know, every year now, you know, that the citizens can see. It's all online, you know, and then town meeting members get it. You know, and now we're receiving the national awards, you know, for it, because we're meeting those requirements of reporting and being, I hate the word transparency, but being transparent, you know, and, being there. That's what we need to be doing, and we do that well here.
Yeah. Well, I have a frame of reference. I spent 5 years on the Ways and Means Committee 20 years ago, and actually in the selectmen 30 years ago. But, you know, you can see the quality of decision-making that can come from, you know, proper introduction of financial management tools. So we got about a minute left. Give us a look into the future. You know, we started as manufacturing, then we went to high tech, then we went to retail, and now we're a mecca for restaurants. Excuse me. Are we going to see a diminishing retail base, and can the town sustain 30, 40, 50 restaurants when we have a turnaround, a negative turnaround?
It can. And the whole thing is flexibility. So, you know, when we brought in Millipore Sigma, the whole thing was bringing in, you know, some flexibility and a new type of industry that can hopefully draw others of the life science model coming in. Because what communities make mistakes on is, you know, putting, you know, all
the eggs in one basket.
You know, eggs in one basket, you know, being all retail, being all manufacturing, and we were there at one point where we were very heavy manufacturing in the 50s. Then the 70s was very much retail. So now I think, you know, we keep looking at the flexibility. And that's where, you know, town meeting very recently talked about, you know, the life science, you know, changing the bylaw for that. And what you need to do is be flexible so that if one area, retail is going to change. You know, we all know that. I was reading an article from Simon's, you know, this weekend. That's going to change. Can we adjust with that change and reuse that space for something else. And this town has done a better job of that, than many other communities in this state.
Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time. I'd like to thank our guest, John Petrin, the retiring John Petrin. We wish him well in his retirement. Hope he goes fishing. I don't think you're a fisherman, though, are you, John?
I'm going to try it, maybe.
John, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Good luck in the future.
Thank you.
That's it from BNews Weekly Special Report. Thank you for joining John and I. Have a good day.